Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. This is a very special episode. It's episode number 200. Isn't that insane? We've been doing this podcast for almost 4 years now, and we've hit 200 published episodes. For this conversation, obviously, we had to do a special one. We're joined by our director of editorial, Sam Lund, who is taking on the moderator seat. And in this episode, we are celebrating by answering a bunch of questions that we've sourced from our team at Omniscient. Very reflective questions, talking about the origins of the company, how we initially got the idea, how we grew it from the ground up, the origins of the podcast, what the initial conception was, and how we've grown and transformed it over time, some of the biggest surprises and lessons learned, and how we've all individually grown from doing 200 episodes and a whole lot more. We're also very proud to announce, this aligns absolutely perfectly with episode number 200. We're proud to announce a project that we've been working on. So basically, we're producing a physical, real, printed magazine, something you can flip through, beautifully produced, a magazine based on our interviews that we've conducted so far through the Long Game Podcast. It's going to highlight some of the most important themes that we've uncovered from our guests, clips and quotes and summaries and interviews, all glossy and beautifully designed, but it's also going to contain a lot of new content too, and editorial snippets from our team, essays, and basically kind of emergent properties from the conversations. So lessons learned, the future of organic growth, the role, what is the role of humans in the emerging AI machine, all good stuff. So if you're interested in getting a copy, it's not out yet. This is a pre-launch, but if you're interested in getting this, we set up a wait list. So you just have to enter your email address and we'll announce when it's ready. So you just go to beomniscient.com/magazine. So you just have to be able to spell omniscient, but beomniscient.com/magazine, which of course we are going to put in the show notes too. So without further ado, here is episode number 200 of the Long Game Podcast. You're in charge, Sam.
I'm in charge? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So you were just talking about the 200th episode, how we're meeting right now with this project going on, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this is the 200th podcast episode. First of all, how does that feel? And does it feel like you got there quickly? David, Alex?
How long have we been doing it? 2020?
2020, you said, yeah, December.
I think so. End of 2020, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is, it's a lot of episodes. I mean, I don't think we ever planned anything beyond, we never set like a number.
No. I still remember when we were testing all the jingles you had produced and we landed on the one that we used in the beginning. And I remember our first episode with David Cadaby.
Yeah, that's right.
Sometimes feels like yesterday and then other times feels like a decade ago, honestly.
Yeah, well, it's like we had really basic goals with launching the podcast, which was basically we were in the midst of a pandemic and we couldn't go out and meet people for coffee, which was a big part of my life at least. And we ended up doing some Zoom calls just to like catch up and like hear what smart people were saying. And we're like, okay, we're starting this agency. We need a way to create content and reach people. We've got full-time jobs. Let's record these conversations. We all like the podcast as a medium. I think I listen to them. We're like, let's record these. That'll be a podcast. And then we can also use this to repurpose and post on LinkedIn. We can post on Twitter. We can make them into blog posts. So it was sort of a very efficient way to produce content and also talk to smart people. And it was something we were already wanting to do. So that was like there was no grandiose goal of like building this into a go-to-market acquisition channel or creating a media company or anything like that.
Seems like there was a lot of that around that time, this, podcasting to create connection, but that became content that others wanted to hear and share. That seemed to be, other podcasts have those stories too. So how long had the business been around when you started the podcast? Were they one and the same?
A year, I think. We started it like a year ago. But yeah, I mean, we were doing it part-time. So it was very early days for the business itself.
And what so far, if you had to pick the highlights, your favorite takeaway, sort of high level, and this is for all three of you. What are your favorites or sort of peak moments that you've had so far?
I haven't done nearly as many interviews as Alex and David have. The few I have done have been really fun, but my favorite moments and favorite episodes by and large are the kitchen side episodes. I think it's been a really fun, it would be interesting to go back and listen to how our partnership, how we talk about the business, how we talk about the industry has changed over the years. I feel like it's truly a peek behind the curtain, which was the whole idea when Alex called it like kitchen side, like back of the house, seeing in the kitchen, how we cook the food, etc. I've also been really proud of those episodes because I feel like selling an agency is really complex, and it's selling people, it's selling talent, it's selling our brains. And the kitchen side episodes is a peek at how we think and how we operate. So in a way, even though we didn't start the podcast as a go-to-market play, it has been because we've been super authentic and we've really brought our true selves to that space. And I think people have really appreciated like how we think about our work and how we work together as a team. And I know it's also had an impact on our hiring pipeline too. A lot of folks that have applied for jobs have mentioned the podcast, and that's been something that's been really cool because they're like, okay, I like these people, I want to work with them.
So Ali gave a very thoughtful answer. I'm going to give a very superficial one. And I remember when we started getting listed on like best podcast listicles, and I think some of them like were by people we knew, but then starting to see on LinkedIn people like sharing our podcast episodes on other people's LinkedIn posts was like, whoa, that was really cool. And it made me feel like we're adding something new to the conversation, and we're doing something maybe not completely different, but different enough where people enjoyed listening to us and would recommend us. And that it was one of those things where it's like, I don't care how many people are listening, but the fact that these handful of people find some value or enjoyment in this makes me feel much better about continuing.
Yeah, I have two. One on the surprise front, I like the kitchen side as well, but I found experientially that when we try to really craft a kitchen side episode intentionally with topics that are hot in the industry, I think they feel more stilted than when sometimes we don't even know what we're going to talk about and we just get on and riff and then end up in some like deep philosophical territory that we had no idea or could not have predicted. So that's my favorite way that we do these. And you can't run all podcast conversations that way. So I like that we have the privilege of knowing each other really well and being able to riff off each other like that. And then for me, the interviews themselves, like there's some people who are very easy for me to talk to. Maybe we know each other in person really well and we can just kind of flow in conversation. But there's been a handful of people that I've interviewed that have made me nervous. That, I guess, yeah. So a recent one, Kyle Chayka, I had read his book. I really liked it. He's a New Yorker writer. He's done podcast interviews with Ezra Klein, and a little bit of imposter syndrome comes up, which is like, who the hell am I to interview somebody who's like written a book, like citations and like, it's really well researched. So I always get like a little intimidated, and then doing those interviews gives me kind of confidence. Like after I do it, I'm like, oh, that went pretty well. That was awesome. So it's sort of like like I reference this quite a bit, Ali, but like you doing improv, like it feels like, something that like brings you outside of your normal comfort zone. It's kind of a growth mindset thing. And it makes me stretch a little bit in my interviewing, question asking, conversational skill.
What do you do to prepare when you're nervous?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Alex's response actually made me reflect on some of my other experiences too. That's maybe a more thoughtful experience where after an interview, I always ask the guests what I could have done better. And they're like, honestly, nothing, which I hate. But then they'll follow up with like, you did your prep, you ask questions no one else asks. Like I got to actually geek out and go deep on some of these things where other people might brush over things very superficially and just move on to their next question. And so I also got some confidence in just knowing that I can carry a decent conversation that'll get people excited about what they're talking about. So
does that translate to the real world for you? Like, do you have more conversational confidence when you're just talking to random people? Because I've felt that before where I'm like, hey, even if I don't know where this is going to go, I'm confident now. At the very least, like I've shown that I can have 1.5 hour long conversations with people that I might be intimidated by that I don't know well, and I'm like, oh, I can do this with a stranger.
Yeah. I think ironically, it led to me doing it less in my personal life because I knew like my own curiosity will lead me to ask questions even if I'm not super interested, but like I know how to get the person talking. And that's resulted in me like being stuck with someone that I don't necessarily want to talk to very much. I don't know if I want to include this in an actual recording, but I'll be like standing there for 30 minutes. I'm like, I lost interest 20 minutes ago, but I keep asking questions.
Why? That's such a David thing. Oh my gosh.
No, I've found myself doing the same thing where you're like, I actually don't want to be social right now. And I'm just being super social. What the hell?
It's a strange, I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's a tick or I don't know.
I just wanted to go on a walk, and I'm now 25 minutes into a conversation.
I feel like that's the story of Sam's life. Just going on a walk and end up talking to someone for 3 hours.
Yeah,
100%.
100%.
Yeah, you'll never believe this guy's life story.
I know. I'm like, weren't you
Sam,
just gone for
like
5
at the
minutes?
grocery store?
Yes, I remember the walk from Wrigley Field. That was a long walk with a very talkative gentleman. And yes, questions. If you ask people questions, it turns out they want to answer them, right? So it's a pretty good way to get trapped. And then I felt rude, right? I mean, do you get that? Where you just, I feel rude if I break the conversation off. Like I owe them a certain amount of attention at a certain point.
That's so Midwestern of you, David.
You mean Sam?
No, well, yes, but Sam is, I think, originally from the Midwest. You're not, and you're still acting like one. So maybe you just spent too much time around all of us.
Alex and I have discussed how we're quite similar in some ways, and I'm from like LA. He's from the Midwest. I'm like, this is kind of strange.
It was about the fact that you grew up drinking milk with dinner, which like is mostly a Midwestern
Very.
thing.
Oh my God, that's deep cuts of Midwestern childhood right there. No wonder I'm lactose intolerant now. Anyway, what were we talking about?
So to get back on that track, question, what then led you all? I remember having a conversation in Austin, Texas with David and Alex, whatever year that was, 22 maybe. But what led you all to where we are now? We're about to print a magazine that's based on the conversations had in these podcasts. How did we get here? Was it just sort of a spur of the moment idea? Was it something you've always wanted to do? Have you had interest in print, somewhere in the deep past, or is it spontaneous?
It was a random idea that David had.
Was it?
I think it's along the same DNA of why we started the podcast. Like, we thought it'd be fun to do. We would get to create something that we thought would be cool and like different from maybe what a lot of other people are doing. Like, I know podcasts are pretty saturated, but if you talk to an average person, not everyone has a podcast. For a magazine, you don't really see a lot of agencies or any other businesses doing a magazine. And I think just growing up, I read magazines, and I always thought it was cool to just have something that you can feel and like flip through. And I enjoy that. Like, I still get magazines in the mail every now and then, and I really enjoy just sitting down on a Sunday morning going through them. And then I kind of had to sell Alex and Allie on it for a while, but I think now is like the right time to actually do it, because we just have so many content. We've had so many great conversations, and they kind of just live somewhere in the ether on the internet. And now we can kind of revive some of them and feature them a little bit more than just letting them fade away.
I'm curious about a few of the magazines that you grew up reading, David. Do you remember a few of them that stood out to you?
I mean, it was like high school, college. I read a lot of like the men's magazines, which might have influenced me a lot more than I'd like to admit. Like,
dude, did you read Men's Health?
Men's Health, Men's Fitness, GQ. I read some Esquire, The New Yorker, Atlantic. Like,
okay.
Yeah. I
used to read Men's Health when I was a kid, and that's where, David, we had a convo last night about creatine. I learned about creatine, and I was like, Dad, I need creatine. And he's
How
like,
old
what?
were you?
He's like, you're in 8th grade.
all I wanted were 6-pack abs like the dude on the cover, and I worked really freaking hard.
So it wasn't just young girls that were affected by this body dysmorphia?
Oh, no, I have crazy body dysmorphia.
Yeah. Because when you said magazines, I was thinking like People, Tiger Beat, like all those like teen girl magazines I used to read. Oh.
No, it was the beginning of my body dysmorphia journey, for sure.
but also your impeccable sense of fashion.
Perhaps that as well.
Read a little GQ, I'm guessing.
Lots of GQ. Yeah.
Gentleman's Quarterly.
GQ is where I learned about advertorials.
Is that what that stood for?
I think so. I just made it. I think it is that.
I think it is. Yeah.
Shooting from the hip here.
I read GQ and there was a issue. I think it was an interview with Miguel, the artist. And it was like an interview with him. And at the end, I was like, wait, this is a freaking advertisement for Ray-Ban. I got duped.
No, Miguel.
And then I started learning about marketing and advertising.
I read a lot of Rolling Stone, which I think introed me to like really interesting ideas. Like, I think Rolling Stone was where I had first learned about Kurt Vonnegut. So I remember like 6th or 7th grade reading some like standout piece, featured piece on Kurt Vonnegut. And then I later read him in high school through English classes. But
Rolling Stone and Esquire had a history of publishing, really great short story writers back in the day. That was something I always liked about those magazines. I also loved Thrasher. I had this mix of like Thrasher and Esquire going on for my aspirations, like being too skinny and like wearing like way too long shorts and dog chains. That was
Dickies
my
shorts.
style inspiration.
Oh, Dickies.
I had like 6 pairs of Dickies in high school, like every color.
Yeah, you cut them up yourself.
Yeah.
Wait, Alex, Allie, what did y'all think when I initially said like, let's do a magazine, and what got y'all to want to do it?
I've always been for it. I think initially it was like a resourcing bandwidth thing that caused me to say like, not right now. But I definitely echo the idea of having something tangible, like something to hold of like, we built this. This is some of what we've worked on. So much of what we do is just like in the ether. Sam and I just talked about this. So much of our work is digital. It's going to be really cool to hold something that we all built together that represents us and a lot of the people that we've worked with. And I think it's, like you said, something that's completely different in today's day and age. That alone, I think, will resonate. It doesn't have to be like a sales tactic or anything like that. It's just this really high value artifact of sorts, especially right now with what's happening, Google, AI, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's a physical thing that we all built and we all worked on together. And it will really be something cool to look back on. That's what I like about it.
I don't remember my first reaction, but if you say that you had to convince us, I would imagine that it's because...
It was resourcing. Yeah. It was like shiny objects.
Yeah, I think it was resourcing and prioritization. But I think my take is that I like to have some percentage of activities that we do just because they're fun or interesting or creative, and really not attach like quantitative growth modeled outcomes to. But my philosophy on that is that you have to earn those. Like, even in like in-house marketing, a lot of people are like, oh, I want to, they have some like massive overhaul idea, but like you should probably do the things that incrementally prove your value first. You sort of buy time and buy air cover. So I think maybe we were just in a time where we just had a lot of kind of probably boring things just in front of us that we should have done first. And yeah, it's like, to y'all's point, it's like now is the time where we actually have a little bandwidth, resourcing, and like we can take on a project like this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because I think the 4 of us have some mix of like super logical operations, sciencey or mathy side, plus also like the artsy or like more creative side as well, that kind of like polar opposites, and we get to flex those things. I think for our team too, what was interesting to me was once we got to the point where we decided we were going to do this, I was really excited for the team, because I know they're working on a lot of client projects, which, sometimes you want to change a pace, and they get to kind of put their fingerprints on this thing that's going to be printed, put out in the world, and like have their name, like literally have their name printed out on it as a contributor, which, I don't know, to me, that's pretty cool to be able to say produce something like that.
Anyway, moving on from the magazine, how did the idea originally come up to break loose from you all had great careers, by all measures, right? Your trajectories were on the up and up, and you created your own agency. How the idea come up, and how'd you make that break?
there's sort of like a very simple story, but it doesn't really encapsulate like why we wanted to build our own business. I would say that all of us have very entrepreneurial spirit and ambitions. So like David and I specifically had talked about starting a business, like tons of different ideas, but nothing really caught fire. The very simple story, it's banal to even say because it just sounds so like point blank, is that David and I were at a conference in San Francisco, and we were at the bar, skipping the talks, talking to Pep Laya, who is my former boss from CXL. And he was explaining how hard it is to hire content and SEO talent. So he was looking at agencies and he's like, oh, this agency charges this. This one does this. Here's their pitch. And David and I at the time were doing consulting on our own. I don't remember what types. Like I was doing a little bit of conversion rate optimization consulting, writing articles here and there, but we already had the freelance muscle. So we just kind of turned to each other and we're like, I think we could do that. You want to just see if we can do that? we realized that there was demand for it and we had the skill set and just started building from there, you know? So it's a very, like, it's almost like, it sounds very silly, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely not something with like PR spin. But I think what was interesting was what happened afterward, because once we were in the founder mindset, we were also like, who do we want to work with? And I remember Alex, you were organizing a trip to Lake Tahoe for a bunch of people, inviting a bunch of other smart like marketers and stuff. And we were like, hey, we should invite, I think we are inviting Christina.
Yes, yeah, totally.
And she invited you, Allie. And then we met with you and we were like, Allie's really smart. We should work with her. And then we brought you on for like freelance work. And we were like, can we just like bring her on as a co-founder? And like, we just started looking at people very differently in terms of like, who are the smart people we want to work with that like could take us to the next level and like see what we're not seeing. And we started building it. I think I forgot how we got to the point of, hey, let's just quit our full-time tech jobs and do this full-time. Like, I don't know if y'all remember how that happened.
Well, no, we were building quite a substantial business before we had left our full-time jobs. So I think it was like the goal pretty explicitly as we were hiring employees that we were going to do that full-time eventually. It was just sort of a maybe fear or something that would hold us back, or like what timing is right. Like that was kind of the question. It wasn't like if, it was more when. But yeah, to add to Allie coming on, like you had like a freelance background, you already had that muscle built up, you had started a business, and then the work that you had done was like 10x more than we expected, or better than we expected. So we're like, wow, this is good stuff.
Yeah, I remember that trip to Tahoe. I think I was talking about my thought leadership program for HubSpot. And then y'all hit me up afterwards and was like, do you want to write for us? And then I became like what was my first head of content or something. And then I kept like replacing myself, brought on Sam. That was still really early days, early 21. So not too much later. 21, early 21. Yes. Yeah. It just grew from there.
There's definitely I do remember we had this conversation of we weren't paying ourselves because we were prioritizing paying our team that we were hiring full time. And it felt, I don't know if morally wrong is the right phrase, but it felt wrong that our team members like you, Sam, and at the time we had like one or two more people who were full-time with Omniscient, but we were part-time, and that didn't feel right. And so
it felt weird.
Yeah, it's like, if they're putting their trust in us, why aren't we putting that same trust in ourselves
100%
to go full-time and like build this business and like become a thriving business? And I mean, it was tough because like I personally took a pay cut from my cushy tech job, but it was also with the understanding that I didn't have to deal with silly large company office politics or dynamics, or with a CEO I didn't agree with. Like I might think they're smart, but not agree with their decisions. And we just get to build something that's of our own and like build a company with the philosophies that we believe in, and like include the team in building that business as well. I found that really fulfilling.
That second part, actually, I mean, that's the personal side of it. In addition to saying like the team's working full time, we're not, what the hell? Like there feels like some dissonance here. All of us were, to be honest, checked out at our full-time jobs. Like if you looked at like, not just the time spent, but like the emotional labor and like how much you were thinking about the agency versus your day job. Like I think it would have been a very, very clear sign that like we were on the way out, you know?
Yeah.
Like that last year specifically, I think all of us were like, the agency is really like the bulk of what we're thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost felt like it was like my full-time job was like a side gig. Like I wasn't working on it nearly as much as I probably should have been. And that was a good signal to transition into the team full-time. And we all did back to back, month after month after month, summer of 22. I mean, we've been here full-time for 2 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Just been crazy to think about.
When do you think, or maybe you can identify a couple, but in terms of turning points, turning points and milestones, what was a turning point for you all with the agency so far, where you felt like the agency shifted or sort of leveled up? So I can think of a couple, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Hiring you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That was huge.
Okay. That's one.
I was going to say that one because it's true. Like that really changed, I think, how we ran the business and operated, and had a really smart person who knew his shit, who's done it before. And I think that also opened up Allie to be able to like build out the org too. I think, I forget who the first big logo we got was, but the first Jasper came. They were an interesting one. And maybe you can talk more about that one, Alex. For me, I think Hotjar was the one that was really interesting to me, because I've used them for a long time. And when we got to work with them, I was like, oh, this is a pretty reputable company logo. Like, I wonder how many more of these we can get, but I'll let you talk about Jasper, Alex.
I think Jasper made us externally visible as a serious agency, a serious contender, because I mean, we were right place, right time in a way. Like, I've talked about this before, but I had known Dave for years, and he had been building Proof, kind of pivoted and started conversion.ai. And really early on, when he had first gotten OpenAI API access, was like, hey, I have a massive opportunity here. Helped stand up their Webflow instance, built it from scratch, like, grew alongside the massive wave of generative AI. Astounding results. They had built themselves, we were just a part of this, but they had built themselves into one of the main players in the generative AI ecosystem, which is the hottest topic of the last few years. And because we had such a tight alignment and partnership and friendship with the team, we were able to produce a case study showcasing those results, and everybody kind of knew the logo. So I think that I don't know if it was necessarily like anything different skill set wise, but like being able to work with a company that grew in that time frame like they did, I think gave us like credibility and visibility.
I would definitely echo both of those as what comes to mind for hires and clients. But I think there was a turning point last year for me, which this might seem a little minor in the scheme of things, but when we restructured into pods, I felt like that really strengthened the fabric of how our teams worked together, and how like strategy and editorial collaborated. And I think people felt and feel less alone in a lot of their work, in combating both like fully distributed workforce as well as just the nature of a lot of our heads down work. So like sentiment and team morale wise, I feel like that was a really positive turning point for us. And it had been something that Sam, you and I had been kind of playing with a little bit for like about a year, brainstorming like how would we do this, et cetera. And when it finally happened, I was like, this is, I think, what we were working towards. It kind of clicked. So that stands out for me in terms of like internal shifts.
I'll add too, this is sort of an internal plus external shift. In maybe the next layer or next step after Jasper was closing enterprise accounts and working with them. So there's sort of a chicken and egg problem where even if you're the best suited agency, but you haven't worked with a Salesforce, like other companies like Salesforce are not going to trust that you could work with them, because it's like, basically like a circular logic thing. But more than that, it was sort of proving to, and I've talked about this on another podcast where I was a guest, but proving to ourselves that not only can we like sell an account like that and work with them, but we're actually really good at it. So there's an account that I can't talk about publicly, but Sam, you and I lead, and like the level of strategic partnership that we have with them, the level of trust, I'm like, oh, we're not just a contender for companies like this and projects of this scale. We're like one of the best suited for these projects. So I think that's given me a lot of confidence in our team, in how we sell and who we sell to and the deals that we structure. I'm like, oh, like this is like zone of genius territory, you know? All of the lessons that we had learned at HubSpot and like Workato and all of our companies that we were building cases and aligning stakeholder expectations. It's like that plus the SEO skill set plus the content and editorial skill set makes us really effective at like complex enterprise organizations.
Agreed. And and again, it goes back to, that trust comes from our capabilities, and then making connections with people through, promising and delivering, and then over delivering, becoming partners in ideation as well, right? And that's where it gets to be really fun, right? So first question, we'll start with joy. Yeah, I like this question. What's one of the greatest joys you've had running this business so far?
I love working with our team. Like seeing folks, well, it really starts in the hiring process, which when I joined Omniscient, as we grew was the first time I'd ever hired, frankly. I'd been a part of hiring panels, but I'd never been like the DRI. Wow, that was HubSpot. Knowing how people want to work with us and admire the way we work, how we're principle driven, et cetera. So it really starts there. But then the folks that we bring on, seeing them grow, seeing them thrive, seeing them do brand new things and kill it, that's been the most rewarding part of all of this for me.
I agree. I particularly enjoy it when our team feel like how do I describe this? When I see somebody on our team come up with the creative solution in a way that like I never would have thought of, I'm like, it's really interesting. That's really cool. I don't know. It just gives me a moment of delight.
Yeah, I feel along the same lines. What gave me joy was once we started interviewing people, they'd be like, oh, I really want to work with you. I did all this research. There's something like you're giving off these vibes about like your company culture and how you work. And it's like, I don't know if you're just blowing smoke up my ass or if you say this with every company you're interviewing with, but it's happened enough times where people use almost the same phrase of there's something about like the way you write your job descriptions and your application. It feels very thoughtful. And I want to work with a company that's that thoughtful. And I'm like, I have no clue what you're talking about. It just seems like these are the things we should be doing, which is probably why it seems so genuine to them. Like we're not like trying to fake that or anything. And
you mean it seems genuine because it is genuine?
Yes.
Yeah.
I still don't understand it to this day. It just seems like the thing to do. But the other side of the coin is once we do hire someone, I love the moments where folks come in and they realize that we trust them and they have more autonomy than they have in the past, where we get questions like, wait, I can do that? Or like, I can say that to a client. We're like, yes, you are not subservient to your clients. You are their strategic advisor. You're a partner to them. You're helping them problem solve. Like you can tell them that what they want is probably not in their best interest. And once we start seeing, or once I have observed folks stepping into that, like they become so much more confident. Like they truly become strategists rather than like in past roles where they felt like they just had to do what they were told. And I just love seeing folks feel empowered to step up and do those things.
And what about in terms of the day-to-day, what's challenging to you all in your day-to-day, week-to-week with the continued growth?
Challenging is a interesting word because the challenging things are the things that I find most engaging. Because writing the weekly newsletter is like the most intellectually challenging thing for me, but it's the thing that I enjoy the most. So did you mean that to be like the most, I guess, like stressful or?
I think it's up to your interpretation. Because I agree. I mean, some of the most challenging projects, they can be stressful because they're challenging, but I think I learn more from them.
Yeah, like I'm seeking, I guess, like positive challenge to kind of grow, into my own next level. But I think the most pressing challenges are pretty common to most agencies and service businesses, which is like generating consistent pipeline and clients, retaining, upselling, getting referrals from existing client base, building and growing the team, leveling up our team, making sure that our cash flow and P&L looks good. It's really like, I think the foundational things are almost always top of mind.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to answer the same thing. Like the quote challenging things, I think, are the boring, like, how do you operate a business things? I think if I were to share a more personal side, it's like managing my anxiety, to be honest, is pretty challenging with lots of unknowns and uncertainty. And oh my God, we've never grown a business to this size before, like had to deal with some of these issues before. And it's just trusting myself, trusting each other, and sometimes honestly letting go of control. Me and Alex were talking about this the other night around sometimes it's out of your hands and it's up to the universe, and being okay with that, because there are just some things I have to accept I can't influence or can't control, and I've done everything that I can, but I'm continuing to work on that, and I think I've gotten significantly better. But in the past, I would ruminate on stuff. I would try to figure out what I should be doing, when in reality there was nothing I could do to add to the situation. And so just accepting more of those things, I think that's honestly the most challenging part. And then I think if I can work through that on my own, then those other things that Alex mentioned, like, it becomes a lot easier to address those things because you know what's in your control and what's not.
Yeah. I think that the challenging stuff is fun, which is probably why we have been so successful. I think the three of us are very driven by those things. But my answer, what came to mind, is definitely similar to David's, and both of them. But all y'all know my like personal journey and joining the business and growing the business and leading by example with our team. But yeah, it's just trusting ourselves, having a high standard of excellence for everything that we do, which is really, really tiring. Showing up, being the best that we can be, and doing it day in and day out. But once you get straight with yourself and once you trust yourself, some of the other stuff comes a little bit easier.
There's one thing I could add. It's not as like common anymore, but like last year was a big issue. Is anybody familiar with George Saunders, the writer?
I've heard the name. Not really, no.
Okay, so I just learned about him and just started listening to an audiobook called the Brain Dead Megaphone, I think it's called. He wrote it in like 2003. Yeah, Brain Dead Megaphone. And it just like reading, you should read it. It sounds like social media today. He was talking about television and news media, but it's like if all of us were at a party and then some person at the party brought a megaphone, right? It's like everybody would pay attention to that person with the megaphone and the things that they were talking about. If they're like, wow, it's a nice spring day, now all of us have to like associate the conversation we were having, which had nothing to do with a nice spring day. Now we have to relate it to that person with the megaphone, and that's now the centerpiece of the conversation. And not only that, but like, what if the megaphone person was incentivized to always be entertaining? So not necessarily to be informative, but like to be entertaining. Now it sounds like social media algorithms, right? So we talk about this all the time on our podcast, and I don't think we need to rehash it too much further, but we rant about, LinkedIn influencers kind of like poisoning the well of conversation. And last year it was really, really common that we would have to address things because that brain dead megaphone person was addressing them. Now all of the conversation had been reframed to something that didn't matter or was counterproductive to people's goals. And I think that was sort of an opportunity cost in many ways, and even made us kind of like tilted sometimes. Like we're like, oh, should we be thinking about this? Should we be doing this? When in actuality, the core value proposition that we started the business with has been and continues to be very effective. So I think just dealing with, I guess, the modern information ecosystem has been challenging for me from a marketing side. Like how we talk about our business, how we relate to our clients, what conversational topics we have, what I write about in the newsletter, what we talk about in the podcast. That's kind of a philosophical answer, but that's certainly something that we've thought a lot about.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's like, I mean, you said it's the challenge with marketing is because like that's what's happening in the market, and we need to figure out like, hey, do we address this head on, or like what things are noise that we kind of just let go? And I think it'll continue to be challenging because it's always changing and the zeitgeist is always evolving as new things come up. But now I think what I'm starting to think about is in the next coming years, like how can we be shaping some of those conversations with our own marketing? That's going to be a challenge too, because I mean, we need to have the megaphone, but not be brain dead.
Well, that was the take that I haven't finished the essay yet, but the take that I had was that actually I just wrote a newsletter today. I finished it on authenticity. But like, there's something to be said to be like, even if it's like pragmatic, to be involved in the sculpting of the conversation, because the ecosystem that we all communicate in is not necessarily going to change or go away. So if we want to maybe stop reacting to things and start sculpting it, like, we also probably should get megaphones.
A bigger megaphone.
It's just the pragmatic thing to do.
Get a bigger megaphone.
Yeah.
I have one. Have you all listened to Tim Ferriss much? Alex, I know you do. Yeah, Alec, David, do you guys listen to Tim? One of my favorite Tim Ferriss questions is the cosmic billboard question. You have a cosmic billboard, which is to say everyone in the cosmos is going to see it, they're going to pass it. You get one message to put out to those passersby. What does your cosmic billboard say?
I've listened to that podcast so many times, and I've heard him ask that question so many times. It's so hard to answer.
I know.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It's hard because it's like you want it to be universal. The first thing that popped into my mind was be kind.
Yeah.
Yeah, that popped up for me too.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that I can like universally think of as a true thing that would make like everybody would be better off for it, you know?
I'm stuck between two. I really like, if you can conceive it and believe it, you can achieve it. And then I've been thinking a lot about, what's that dude, Sisyphus?
Yeah.
The dude rolling a boulder up the mountain.
One must imagine him happy.
Yeah. People will hate on him, but it's like, this dude has purpose. He has this thing he's trying to achieve, and whether or not he achieves it is not the point. And in my mind, it's just this idea of like defining what excellence looks like for yourself, and then strive for it. Like, screw what other people think is excellence or whatever, or what game they're playing. Just focus on what game you want to play and what you want to achieve. And like, don't let the other folks who are kind of wandering around aimlessly define what you end up doing with your life.
David, can I just say that I love that conversations with y'all sometimes include things like, I've been thinking a lot about Sisyphus.
I feel like David like mentions him a lot in conversation. There's a lot.
So Camus was the one that Camus said, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. That was the origin of the quote. And then it's Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill, and he's just like, fuck this rock. I'm not happy. Fuck the gods. I just want to die. Fuck you, Camus.
Fuck you, Camus.
The other thing maybe I would think about too is something on mindfulness. I'm reading, is it Island by Aldous Huxley? And I'm only two or three chapters in, but has anybody read this book?
I don't know. He wrote other books besides Brave New World.
He's written a ton. He actually wrote an essay about psychedelics, Doors of Perception. But Island is his last work, and it says on the back cover that he believes it's his most important. Anyway, the protagonist, it starts out, I haven't read the book, so anybody who's read this, just, you know, he's shipwrecked on an island, and this island is like a utopia, apparently. But one of the first things he encounters is this bird, like a parrot type thing that keeps repeating here and now and attention. And it's like a very like Buddhist, like meditative island people. And they trained all the birds to just remind everybody here and now, attention, here and now. So I kind of like that concept too.
Allie, what about you?
Yeah. Now that I've had some time to think about it, definitely appreciate all of what they said. Mine, I think, would be do what scares you. I personally have always felt like fear is a good leading indicator of what I should challenge and continue to pursue. I used to see it as like a big blocker, but from, you know, joining Omniscient and growing the business and showing up every day to doing improv and just a ton of other stuff, I think that's really important, to face your fears. That sounds so cliched, but I think it's really true.
I had a mantra for myself. I think it was last year. Alex knows this. It was faith, not fear.
Mm-hmm.
And it was inspired by Mr. Kanye West. It was just the idea of like, this dude had no fear, and he just knew that whatever he did, he had faith that he would be able to do it. I'm like, I need that faith in myself. Like, why am I'm scared because I don't think I can do it. And so I don't. And so like,
Yeah.
What if I can do it? And just leading with faith in yourself instead of fear. And that changed a lot for me.
Wasn't there an old story of him before he was like big and famous? I think it was Chappelle or somebody like that who had encountered him. And there was a quote where Kanye was just like, because I'm dope and I do dope shit. Like that was his justification. I don't remember the full story, but I remember that quote. Like, that's a guy with confidence.
Yeah, it's a good one.
He's never lacked confidence, no. I remember seeing a story on him back before when he had just gotten famous for Through the Wire, I think. And he talked about how he painted the music that he saw. He definitely came across as a genius at first, right? He might still be. He might be a bit of a mad genius, but yeah. Painting the music. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a Dave Chappelle story. It was the first time we talked to him on the phone, and I don't remember what the question was or what he was justifying, but it's like, and then he says, because my life is dope and I do dope shit. And then he hung up the phone.
Do dope shit.
It's amazing how far you can get in life when you give zero shits about what other people think of you.
Seriously.
Mm-hmm.